Welcome, everyone. Happy Tuesday. We're excited to have another episode of Talk Advocacy to Me, where we discuss all things customer marketing and advocacy, focusing in each time on one question. And as we never shy away from controversial or difficult topics, we do have another doozy for you today. So if you joined us last week, that was a little bit of a big topic. We have another huge topic for you today, which I'm excited about because I think, honestly, if we're going to talk, let's talk about things that really matter and that are very, very interesting, if not difficult sometimes. So today we have a very, like I said, big idea, and that is, should I start rethinking my entire customer marketing strategy? I'm so excited about this topic. And when I was talking to our wonderful guest, Jane Menyo, and this topic kind of formulated this, is this what we're actually saying? Is this what we're actually saying that we're asking? And it was like, yes, that is what we're actually going to be asking today. So we will hopefully break this down. We always love to hear your opinions, your thoughts, your questions. So please chat away with us if you're here for the LinkedIn Live. But before we dive into all of that, I want to take a minute to introduce Jane to everyone. If you don't know her, many of you I know do, because Jane has been a pretty big voice in the customer marketing space for a while, over 10 years of experience in B2B marketing. And Jane is one of those people who's really passionate about building meaningful customer journeys, interactions, yes, but journeys too, to drive go-to-market value. Jane, you are one of those people who's always thinking about the end goal. How does advocacy, how does customer marketing impact the organization as a whole? And are we, and how are we telling that story? So I'm very excited to jump in with Jane today. Jane, would you like to say hello to our captive audience?
Yes, thank you so much for having me on. I'm really excited to talk through this topic. I know it's something that's very top of mind for a lot of people today. So thank you, Liz and Deena, for inviting me. And maybe before we get in, can I just give you a compliment on the logo that you all have built for your program? I think it's so beautiful, and I love the branding behind this.
Oh my goodness, that's hilarious. Thank you so much. I don't know if anyone's called it beautiful before, Jane, but we've definitely had some comments on it for sure. We're very excited to have you. Thank you so much for joining. I'm really impressed when we talk about the way you're thinking about this. And of course, we also have Deena, my partner in crime here on this podcast, who's always with us. Deena, say hello.
Hello. Hi. Thanks for that, Liz. Hey, Jane. Jane, good to see you. Full transparency, Jane is a client of ours. It has been for a few years now. And Jane, what I really like about working with you, further to what Liz has said in her intro, is that you're always pushing the boundaries of the practice, which means that you are, the people that you work with on your team, contractors, everyone around you is also pushing the boundaries of the practice. I don't know that I've ever seen you just kind of sit back and be comfortable with where things are. So this is a great topic for us to dive into.
Well, leading into that, since Deena mentioned comfort and being uncomfortable. So I'll just restate once again, our topic today is, should I be rethinking my entire customer marketing strategy? And I want to dive in a little bit on how we even got to this topic. And so I think the best way to lead into that is just to start with, what are some of the pain points that, Jane, you have been feeling, or that we have seen in this practice as a whole? What we've noticed are what a lot of customer marketing and advocacy practitioners struggling with at this point in time. So let's just talk about your personal experience right now. Like, what are some of the pain points you have been feeling or addressing recently?
Yeah, well, I'd say that maybe my experience, I've worn a lot of hats in marketing. I've done a lot of different roles, and ultimately found my passion in customer marketing just because I wanted to be so close to the customer, and I love those opportunities. And I think what gets me rethinking a lot of the work is customer marketers are some of the hardest working marketers that I've ever worked with as a sort of a practice. I think they're people who have a lot of various skill sets and creativity, and their role is so unique in marketing because of the nature of what it does, right? We have to be so focused on building relationships, but at the same time creating high quality content and hearing the needs of all of our stakeholders, and finding these different ways that you're taking fresh stories and like breaking the mold with your storytelling for the business, with your customers leading the charge. And oftentimes that's like a very difficult role to do very successfully. And I think what kind of where it gets me thinking about like some of those pain points is oftentimes customer marketers are measured on the outcomes of their work, that final deliverable of the polished piece and the outputs that they're creating. But so much of the effort and energy into getting that to be high quality happens behind the scenes. It's, yeah, again, years of relationship building, or like deep dive into understanding like the unique product use cases, or like what makes a story like actually interesting with how customers are using your products or portfolios, right? So I think that's for me where customer marketers sometimes get underrepresented in those ways. And as we've talked about before, don't always get that sort of seat at the strategy table within marketing teams. But for me, I actually think it's one of the most strategic functions that you can be a part of, which is really interesting. So a lot of like the pain points I'm facing today is like, how do I help better advocate internally for the work that we do and the strategic nature that it does have? And I think this is something that a lot of great leaders already intrinsically know, right? Is they know that the best proof comes from their customers, right? Mm-hmm. All executives want that great storytelling to be coming from their customer base and from the market more broadly. And so a lot of my work is understanding like, how do I help make sure that like our work is represented as a part of that, and that we are staying in very close step to those needs so that we're quickly, nimbly able to get into that.
Mm-hmm. When you and I talked ahead of time, you brought up this really great analogy, which I mean, I don't know why I'd never thought of it before, but you said customer marketers were a little similar to sales, which honestly, sometimes sales are like, oh, there are antagonists. Not they don't necessarily seem on our side all the time, but you said there's similarities there. So traditional customer marketing and advocacy, we have seen it be heavy and manual. There's a lot of relationship building. There's a lot of one-to-one work. There's a lot to do about messaging and making people feel valued and seen and all this type of things, just like sales. And then you mentioned, you have to build that base of customers. It's like your Rolodex of relationships and network as a customer marketer, and that takes time, right? And then if you leave, you're starting all over again with a whole new network sometimes. And I thought, oh man, that's a really good analogy. I've never really thought of customer marketing like that. And then now you just said something about how we do a lot of this work, and then our end result is an amazing story. Well, sales does a lot of all that work behind the scenes, and their end result is dollars, right? And so a lot of similar work going on in the background. We both get to our end result, but of course, one has way more visibility in the organization as far as the end result, way more what we'll say clout than, okay, I was able to do and complete this amazing initiative with this customer. And so that's like, wow, that's really interesting. Similar work, similar effort, but the results are measured completely different.
Yeah. And I think it's oftentimes because the work that we create is not easily tracked, right? So hopefully if you're creating, like what we create is a lot of different customer proof, and we create it in lots of different formats, right? Like we created as, quotes, like stats, long form case studies, videos, customer speakers, webinar presenters. Like there's all these different ways that we're trying to proliferate customers into our marketing, that it's so, spread out that it's actually hard to capture when isn't customer proof being leveraged within our materials? So even if we're tracking, success of maybe our customer stories page, or when we do have a speaker, sometimes it's often hard to pin that back to the advocacy component of it specifically. And I think that's a kind of a good problem to have, right? Like I'm a big fan of, never get a case study, because I think that information should be accessible, even though maybe that does make it more difficult for me to prove out the ROI of my content. It's still the right thing to do, because we want that story to be out in the market. So I do think about that a lot of the time is, it's harder to sometimes measure the impact of our work. But I think that that's where, oftentimes understanding like how and where it's being leveraged is valuable. So one of the things that I've done here at Gong today, a lot of my focus has been building out like how we're engaging with customers throughout the customer journey. And so I look to that sort of customer journey infinity loop we're all very familiar with, and think about how and where we're placing different proof along that journey. So from that standpoint, I think about how are we building proof from thought leadership through to the solution section of our customer journey, through, or the buyer's journey, through to the actual closed loss stage, like how are our closed win stage, how are references playing a role? And then on the post-sale side, how are we driving customer education through the voice of our customer? How are we using best practice content to help get them to more sophisticated and mature use cases that help actually drive more and stronger, better advocates that actually help my pool at the end of the day have more robust stories themselves. So I think about a lot of the times that the customer advocacy work that we're doing should be proliferated across our customer journey. And I want it to be leveraged everywhere it can possibly be. Even if that does come at the end of the day with a harder, measurable challenge for me to work through.
Yeah. And I mean, you're getting into a little bit of, the realization of what you've done, which, of course, that's where we're going to go. I want to take one little step back. We're so aligned with that journey work, Jane. So we're putting a pin in that. As far as challenges, back to the challenges, I know that we talk a lot about that inability to clearly define what we do. You just said that, like, how do we clearly define the outputs? And then this idea of like, everyone's bought into this, you said, like, gut knowledge, they understand we should all be customer centric, or that's like one of the buzzwords right now, customer led, customer centric. Okay, guys, like, doesn't every single organization want to be customer led and customer centric? Of course. What leader is ever going to say they don't want to be that? And I think then it's, do we have any really clear definition of what that means and what the outputs of that should be and how they are measured? No, I think that's part of our struggle. We have this really big idea, but we are not necessarily, the organization as a whole is not necessarily clear on what exactly that means or how that should be measured. Deena, I want to make sure we get your voice in here too. I mean, as far as pain points, before we move to, realizations, anything you would add?
Yeah, there's a couple of things, Jane. It really resonated with me, the way that you described that, the kind of the story finding process, and that it's like there is this end result, but a big part of customer marketing and advocacy is like being there at the right time to catch that story, like at that moment of like passion and delight that story happens, instead of being way down the road and then saying, hey, tell us that great story again. It's a much different story when you're there and you're embedded in the relationship with the customer. And great stories only can be harnessed if you're there to catch it at the right time. Otherwise, it's just kind of like that retelling of a story, if you know what I mean, and it loses some of its pizzazz. So that really resonated with me. The whole comparison to sales, yeah, I mean, I get it, but darn it, we don't have that clear endpoint, which I think is really a key point of this conversation when it comes to strategy. And then I'll just, final thought there is around just the idea of customer centricity inside the business. It's almost like, to your point, Liz, it is such an expectation that is it kind of getting lost that there is like a whole machine that needs to make that happen. Customer centricity isn't just something that we are. It is something that, like, every single day, to what you said, Jane, there are marketers working really, really hard to make that happen, but it just kind of becomes just the expectation, not totally visible that there is that whole machine making.
Well, and it's like, if you don't fully understand what customer centricity means or is, or what the practice of customer centricity is, then you don't know how to budget resourcing and funds. Like, where does that go to promote customer centricity? And I know that that's something you've talked about as well, Jane.
Yeah, it's definitely a cultural business initiative, right? Like, I think it actually needs to start from the top down. It cannot be one person within the organization who's driving that. So here at Gong, actually, one of our core operating principles is creating raving fans. And we look at that not just from a department like me, where that's obviously like part of my role, like that's the job. But actually, like, how is product thinking about that day to day? How is sales thinking about that in their sales engagement, right? It's not just getting someone to close a deal. They need to create raving fans with our products. So oftentimes I'm saying, I'm just capitalizing on the raving fans that others within the organization have built. It's because of the fact that we have within our DNA to be customer centric that I have the opportunity to then take those voices and bring them to market, right? So I think that is where helping showcase, like, if we need more customer storytelling and advocacy in the marketplace, it really does need to come with that strategic shift. And I do think that that's a key part of sort of brand building as well as category building too, which I think is important. Maybe, if we touch back on the treating customer advocacy like sales, I can share a little bit about how I think about that and where it does actually, for me, help us create, maybe not necessarily like the outcomes metrics, because I look at that sort of differently, but how I track the opportunities for finding that success. So what I actually do is I start with essentially a TAM analysis of my own customer base. So I look at the core setup of my customer base and I understand, okay, where are customers in their level of satisfaction with our products? Like, how are they looking from like more of that health score standpoint? Where are they at in their maturity of our use cases? So where are they at actually in terms of how far along they are in their customer journey? And then what do I look at in terms of maybe different representation I might want for different stories? So this essentially gives me the landscape of my customer base that I might go after for different needs. This is, I think, important because it's actually helped me get a lot more of that sort of seat at the table with our executive team to be able to say, here's how I track and manage to the customer stories that we want to be telling in the market. So here's what I see as the landscape of who we have today, and how does that match up to where we have more needs. So I'll give an example. So we launched a new product to market in the last 6 months. And what we looked at is, okay, how many customers do we have actually within that beta program who are going to be helping us sort of be early adopters of that product that we could then be building relationships with earlier on in their customer journey phase, so that when we go to the time of launch, we actually have a story we can tell in the market. So it's actually starting a lot earlier into the customer journey, like customer story needs, to actually build the relationships and build that programming around that. And then also the recognition that some of those customers aren't going to come out the gate with, a huge impact story, or they're not going to be seeing necessarily like this like major results transformation story that we might want to tell long term. But like, how do I get proof throughout their experiences or throughout that pool of customers uniquely who are using that product? So I think that's another way that, even more that micro sense, we look at who's the addressable audience that we want to go after for these, and then how do we make sure we're building the appropriate pipeline to have the right outcomes and volume that we need for the business. So it's actually creating sort of a scaled model of, if there's this many people who are on the product, what percent of that do I think I can capture, and for what types of output, which also helps me better manage to our resourcing and productivity needs of, reasonably, like, how many can we create off of a certain pool? Even if all of them are happy and ready to come tell stories, I obviously wouldn't be able to tell all of them necessarily. So It gives us more leverage to be able to say, this is where we are picking and choosing to focus our energies to make sure that we're creating the right stories that the business is interested in.
I love that approach, Jane. So first of all, looking at the total addressable market from a storytelling or advocacy, let's just see it, even advocacy perspective, depending on the needs of the organization, what is really there, and then taking it one step further, which is what we love, right? And you're thinking about, okay, so for these different initiatives or moments or opportunities, where in the journey do we need to actually touch them? And then this type of story or activity, advocacy initiative, maybe that is going to take 6-month pipeline. Like this type of deal or this type of opportunity usually takes this length of time, right? Whereas if, I need a review, here's my total addressable market, is anyone who maybe has a good health score, they're satisfied with our organization, and they've been with us for X amount of time, whatever it might be, that's a really big total addressable market. But when we have these very specific needs, looking through that and using that type of scientific approach, I really like that. And the reason I like it is because I think what we've seen lately is that, customer marketing is really, we support a lot of other functions and roles, right? We're reliant, let's just say that we're reliant on everyone else doing a really good job at their job for us to be able to even to get to those end results that we need. The product has to be good. The customer success and service has had to be really well received and quality before we can really get in there and do that. So that can cause some difficulty with our role where we're trying to overcome a lot of obstacles. But as customer marketers get more and more savvy and start thinking this way and embedding these types of touch points and these types of relationship building plays further along and across the customer journey, we're able to take our skills, which you said are like, we're really good at relationship building. We're really good at finding those moments or creating those moments. And then we start to layer on much more strategically and scientifically across multiple different touch points for that customer, or we help those other teams orchestrate those touch points as well.
Yeah. And I think you touched on plays there, and I want to kind of maybe dig into that a little bit, because I think customer marketers have traditionally built around like programs, like a lot of marketers, right? We build out the programs that we run. And I think there's a sort of shift or sort of alignment between how does the program align up to where the customer is in their journey. And that's where the play capability comes in to be your friend, right? So you may have, let's say, for example, your program that you're running is your references program, right? So how and where in the customer journey do you drive the ask to make them a reference customer becomes more of your play aspect, right? So this is where those two sort of come together. Is the program exists as the business need to fulfill the pipeline of advocacy, right? And that's how the program functions. But the play comes in to say, how are you actually driving that touch point with the customer? So at more of the account level or the contact level to sort of create the volume for that capacity too. So I think about this too from like those programs that are maybe always on, like a references program, to something more like a cycle-based program, like an awards program, right? So like, how are we actually looking at our awards program and finding out strategically with different account types, how are we building early advocacy or capitalizing on more mature advocacy at an account based on where they might be in the journey, and how we're actually structuring our program for that.
Yeah, Deena, this is like totally reminding me of that that circle thing, that circle graphic that we built where, the outside is all the data and the input that we now have the ability. Oh my gosh, like 20 years ago, everything has changed so much. So nobody should feel like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we haven't been doing this. Everything has changed so much recently. There's so much data available now, and it can all be brought into a certain specific place for us to address. And so everyone has more access to that data. So we look at all the data that you have on your customer, where they are on that journey, like Jane said, their sentiment, their adoption, which features and products they are using, what's their use case, all of that data, how are they interacting with us? And then you're able to now in a much more strategic fashion, spin off. I think that's the word we use, Deena, right? Is like, when do we spin them off into maybe more specific programs, or we could even call them, sometimes it's a play, sometimes it's a formal program, right, Deena?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm thinking about that awesome graphic now and just like, geez, if only we knew how to animate things, then that graphic would be solid gold.
Yeah,
But
we're laughing because the
it's
graphic
sort
is
of
very
explained.
rudimentary, but the idea was there, and that's the important thing. But I mean, I think it's even a realization to me hearing you talk, Jane, too, is like, yeah, a lot of this just wasn't really possible back when we all started in marketing, and a lot of that is now opened up. So okay, so we discussed some pain points, and then real quick some realizations, right? And I want to get to these realizations real quick, and then we're going to go, and you've already talked about a few strategies, Jane, but I know people want to hear more about that. But what are some of the realizations you've come to in your career?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just constantly, challenging yourself, questioning yourself or the way that you're running things. I think that, as marketers, we do have our programs and our playbooks just generally, but what works in marketing tends to be one sort of cyclical, like trends come and go, right? Things work and then suddenly we oversaturate them and they no longer work. And then 10 years later, they start working again. So I think like one, staying fresh, and then also sort of like, checking back in on yourself and just sort of asking yourself the hard question of, is like, should I be doing this, or like, is this really worth it for me to do? And I think oftentimes that's where, the more you push to sort of help get a seat at the table for different forums, people are naturally going to ask you those questions. So you think just helping yourself be prepared for that whenever that question comes up and telling you that way.
So do you think, like, is what we're doing working, I guess, to go back to our big question here, or is there need for a change?
There's absolutely need for a change. I think that right now, all of marketing is going to going a big shift. I think that's only going to accelerate even faster. I think that especially like generative AI and AI capabilities are going to completely change the way that we work and operate as marketers, and the way that our customers and buyers already come to expect how we engage with them. We already know in the last 5-10 years, customer expectations, and I think like the analyst community has heavily sort of touted this, but they're coming in with a knowledge and expertise that they're already more prepared when they get into a buyer's journey, right? So you're not actually starting that level of influence. So I think it's a matter of helping educate the market more than it is necessarily just building a lead and converting a lead. You have to actually be telling that bigger story in a marketplace. I think too, from like the customer marketing side, I'm really excited to see where a lot more emerging technologies and AI capabilities might actually come in to strengthen our work. I think that what we're seeing today with generative AI and how we actually can help streamline content development is only going to scratch the surface of what we can use. I think actually there's a lot more interesting applications on more of the data side and the surfacing of advocates, and how we better understand how and when and where we should leverage those folks, that I think we're going to have more opportunities to have that level of data kind of come to the surface than some of the traditional ways where we may have to go out and uncover those people, or sort of turn over every stone to actually find those folks. So more of that sort of bigger data standpoint, I think that's where there's going to be a lot of shifts that are going to be really valuable for our departments specifically.
Yeah, I'll just throw in a little example because I think it's so interesting. I ordered some makeup online. Yeah, I finally caved in because Il Maquillage or whatever has just been like in my feed nonstop. So I'm like,
Oh,
okay, those
okay.
women look like me,
Yeah.
middle-aged woman. I'll give it a shot right now. So I ordered some. And then I just thought the other day, man, it's taking a long time to get here. I opened my email and there's an email from them, and they're like, we know you ordered this a while ago. We just realized that the carrier has said there's some problems. So we just want to say sorry for that experience, which I just realized it hadn't come, right? I'm not sitting around at my doorstep waiting for this to come. And they're like, so just to tell you, we're sorry about the experience, which isn't their fault. It's whoever they're using to ship. is like, here's $15 just to buy something, whatever you would like. Now, of course, that's not enough to buy any single item on their website. So I get the marketing ploy there, but I also think about that. They've identified a possible moment in the customer journey that might have been negative for me. And before I even have time to process that, yeah, that's a negative experience, I'm a little PO'd. They use that moment to create some surprise and delight and goodwill. Now that's a negative moment. If we could even think through as customer marketers, those positive, like, are we thinking one step ahead of the customer? Are we just waiting for the customer to tell us that they're happy, or to tell us that, oh, I guess we've reached this milestone with them, but becoming more aware of how we can do that. And then at scale, Jane, and I know you and I have talked a lot about at scale, that is going to have to be some of the new norm for what we are doing, because we're not going to just settle for working with these happy customers one-on-one. That's going to create some wonderful results and stories and whatnot, but we need to think bigger now about the entire customer base, and how we can create value both for the customer and for the organization with our unique position and our unique skill set. And like you said, you think we do have a really strategic seat at the table, because we are touching the customer, and we're one of the departments or practices that, if we're doing this correctly, we can touch the customer across the entire customer journey, not segmented on where they are sitting or who they're interacting with. So I think I just got excited when you talked about that, because I think, yeah, like, this is some of the future of how we need to be thinking. We just have to get in that mindset, and we're still a little in the one-to-one, which, by the way, just so everyone knows, we still believe in one-to-one. We still think it's amazing. We still think you'll have your one-to-one programs.
Yeah. I mean, and I think this is where it's so valuable. The one-to-one is like the quintessence, like that's the best part of the job, right? Like that's like what so much of us love, and like why we kind of gravitate towards these types of roles. And I think you're right. Like B2C companies have figured this out, and they know how to capitalize on data and signals more strategically than B2B companies have. I mean, we're still kind of in the Marketo 3 fire scores realm, right? Like it's very old school. And we need to be thinking differently. So, and it makes sense, right? Like our signals are different for our work than, a B2C side. So, for B2B, we oftentimes have not just a single contact we're trying to work. We have an entire buying committee. We have a whole landscape of different people that we need to be engaging with for different purposes. And so I think that's where, for me, understanding like those types of signals that we can be getting in a more modern sense than the traditional ways is where I'm really excited. I think there's a lot more information we can be gathering. We think about the traditional way, and I have my plays built on this too, but is, you've got your NPS score, and great, you found someone who's a promoter, and they've already taken the action to give you an NPS review, which is a great sign. And then they also give you a promoter. So now you can go do more things with that. And that's very fruitful, but I think it's also depending on someone taking that initial action. So how do you lower the bar for people to get involved with your work, or maybe offer up other things that may be more beneficial or actually tap into their motivations than something like an NPS, which is kind of more goodwill and just works because it's so simple and easy for someone to act on. But I think there's a lot more signals out there. I mean, I could talk all day about the ways that we use Gong, and actually a lot of that access to the customer, which is very accessible to our whole business, to understand customers and identify customers and be able to hear their sentiment or see who's involved in a deal cycle in ways that we never could with even just the more traditional players like Salesforce and Gainsight and NPS scores. Like there's so much more access to data that we can then find. But I think it's that standpoint of how we're actually creating this level of what I call zero party data, the voice of customer firsthand data. And then now we'll be able to act on that in more interesting ways too.
Okay. Super exciting. Like I can feel I get pretty passionate about it, because I love to think about what the future could look like. And by the way, we are good at one-to-one, right? And B2C is not, they have a whole different model, but we are really good at that. So we can say that we are really good at one-to-one relationships. So we've talked about some of the challenges. We've talked about some of the realizations. Like, okay, something is going to have to change. So I guess I'm always running behind, but Jane, I know people want to hear, okay, so if you had those challenges, you had those realizations, what are you doing to address it? I know you shared a little bit, but what more could you share about how you're trying to change your strategy, change your approach, change your outlook to make customer marketing a more strategic player, get that seat at the table, and get the allotment and the resourcing that it needs?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing we did was we just went deep into all of our reporting and our impacts. And so we looked at, we created a structure for our own sort of board level, program level, and then more tactical measurements of everything we could look at. And we went through and we filled in all the boxes, right? We looked at every program. How is it performing? What's the health of it? Where do we want it to go? And that actually gave us a roadmap for saying, okay, here's an area where, you know, we have so much demand for this, but we're not to where we want to be. So that's where we need to be focusing on. Or, hey, we're running this program today. It takes up a lot of our energy and cycles. And ultimately, the output of it is maybe not the best thing we could be doing right now. So that's something we have to just make the hard decision, or like the easiest decision, to cut or pause, right? And I think it's healthy, like anything, to go through that exercise. And we now do it on a regular basis where we're looking at that. The majority of those, like, metrics and KPIs we look at on a quarterly basis. And then we do an annual review where we actually make sure that that's strong and the right areas for us to focus as a business. That also gives me a lot of talking points where I can take that back to other stakeholders and leaders and actually have that conversation of, hey, here's where I'm at today. Like, this is my instinct on where we need to be focusing, or here's where I see that there's actually opportunities to focus. Is this what you agree with? Or, is there something else that's totally a burning need that you want us to be addressing? So I think sometimes just starting with that sort of health gut check is always healthy. And then also, gives you a better sense of, where your work is at today and where you can be optimizing for. And also the kinds of things that in your career building moments help you build the case for the work that you've had, how that's impacted the business, the kinds of things you want to put on your resume or take to a promotion conversation. So if it's something that you're not already doing today, it's definitely a skill set that you want to be building on constantly.
I like that, Jane. Sign of a really strong leader to be able to take the hard look at the outputs of the team and course correct as need be, and also celebrate when you have those wins.
Jane shared this.
Good job.
We shared it in our link, our newsletter, the Talk Advocacy to Me newsletter. Go sign up for it on our LinkedIn page if you don't get it yet. But we shared this triangle that Jane had made, and we have you had your high touch programs up here at the top of the triangle, of course. And then there's some mid scaled programs in the middle. And then there's this bottom of what are we doing to touch all of our customers? And where I think this is, sort of going is that bottom place we haven't really been touching strategically. It's just been kind of like, oh, we send a newsletter or we do this. And now I think that's where a lot of the playground might be, is we're either going to do these really high impact one-to-one or small cohort programs that we know drive revenue or retention or cross-sell. We have the numbers behind that. We can measure that. Or we're going to build these models or these plays at scale. We design them based on data. We run them, and then we iterate as we look and see what's working. I think the messy middle is kind of where we've been playing and spending a lot of our time. It can be very time consuming, but still a little difficult to see the major impact. It's like, yes, we got 50 reviews, or yes, we did 10 stories, but we don't necessarily know for that messy middle. But that's where most of our time and resourcing has gone. Whereas there's more of a automated, scaled approach here at the bottom we haven't really been playing with at all. And then of course we know we have those high level, like you said, Jane, the fun stuff, the one-to-one relationships, those amazing stories that are just like so hard to get, that we get across the finish line, or that speaker who says something that we could never say about ourselves and have the same impact. We know that's valuable, right? I mean, I just threw out, I don't know if that's how you read your triangle, but that's just kind of how I was reading that triangle today, is like, maybe that's where this is kind of going.
Yeah. And I mean, it's sort of like if you haven't seen the graphic, it's like the ABM pyramid, right? Of like sort of how you move up the funnel, like your hierarchy. And then what we've done is we've basically built a match system of like the profiles of who our raving fans are. And, from the more strategic senior people at the higher level accounts that we want to be engaging with, down to sort of like the bulk user audience, or maybe the people who are the naysayers that we actually have to convert. So I think a lot of times it's thinking about that funnel, not only in how we drive the programs on the work, but I think about it too of how do I actually get people to move up the pyramid? So how do I engage people to the point where they are moving within their own levels, or maybe I'm helping support their own career paths because I'm helping them show success in their roles as a relation to our products or our solutions. So that's a lot of times where we're doing our matching system on that. And then what we've actually done is we've sort of structured that against a journey framework. So how are we looking at each unique user profile and understanding where in their customer journey and their maturity we should actually be designing some of those plays around engagement and how that actually helps us with our relationship building. So we're doing a little bit less of, hot lead lands on your plate, like go after that, but actually like how do I like build a relationship with them throughout the journey, particularly when we think about some of those key accounts for our business.
Mm-hmm.
Love that, Jane, looking at the floaters and the friendlies, as we like to call them, whereas we have been focused on the fans, the fanatics, the floaters and the friendlies. There's a lot of them out there. And I like your use of the word signals throughout this conversation, really finding the right time to engage them. Really good stuff.
Maybe we can share that in the show notes. You guys, I know there was a couple questions. I'm so sorry we didn't get to it. I promise we'll get some responses to you on LinkedIn. Thank you for those. We appreciate it. But hopefully this has left everyone with a lot of food for thought. But I think it's also just reinforcing that the practice is moving, and that is a good thing. And we can do things today we couldn't do when we started about 10 years ago that we now need to think about. It can be overwhelming. Jane just talked about matching customer journey, but also their own unique journey of maturation and where they're at with adoption, and of course their profiling. And it is a lot. And so we'll just reiterate what we always say, which is, start small. And there are things you can do to just put one play in practice. Think about one opportune moment that you can set an automated play against and start building some of that automation and proactiveness that we talked about here today. But reach out to Jane if you have further questions. We always throw our guests under the bus that way. Reach out to Jane on LinkedIn. I'm sure she would love to respond to you, or leave your additional questions in the LinkedIn and we'll get back to you. Jane, thank you so much for sharing this. I know we're thinking about things like way up here, and I love it.
Thank you for having me. Thanks, and yes, please, would love to connect. I learn more from everyone else than I think they can learn from me. So always open to having the conversations. And Liz, Deena, so wonderful to chat with you and kind of hear your perspectives on this as well.
Yes, amazing. Thank you, Jane.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.